My father was a great cook. He didn't have any formal training in cooking, but he was the youngest of 7 children, and I know he watched his mom make a lot of meals. My mother had the never-ending task of putting dinner on the table every night. So on the weekends, when my dad wanted to cook, my mother gladly relinquished the responsibility to him. Watching my dad in the kitchen was pure entertainment. He sang and he whistled as he made his way through his culinary experiments, taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that out of the cabinet, putting it all together and making something really delicious to eat. And he never used a recipe that I can recall. I loved watching him dance his way through the kitchen, dirtying every pot and pan in the house. Now, the act of bystander or onlooker in the kitchen is a fairly recent phenomenon. Traditionally, kitchens were pure work zones, so if you weren't an active part of delivering a meal, you weren't in the kitchen. Kitchens were small, not terribly well ventilated, and depending on your social class, they were either at the center of the house so that they could provide additional heat for the dwelling, or they might be sequestered to some other part of the house so that the cooking smells didn't permeate the living area. The average American meal was pretty simple. You took a little bit of meat and a few vegetables, and you had some starch to help fill you up, and it was probably all in one pot. You added a little bit more water, depending on the number of people. And everybody, regardless of the same age, ate the same thing. Appliances were kind of clunky and inefficient, and cabinet space was limited to whatever small hutch you had been given as a wedding present or had been passed down from some previous generation. Now, the transition from these kitchens to the contemporary trophy kitchens that we know of today have been influenced by a number of things: technology, war, manufacturing, gender politics, and TV. And I know that Frank Lloyd Wright opened up the kitchen and experimented with the kitchen in the 1930s, but for the rest of us, that really didn't hit mainstream America for another 40 years. And I really don't want to tell you the story of Frank Lloyd Wright. I want to tell you the story of 3 women who had great influence on the development of the contemporary kitchen. A woman that you've probably never heard of, a woman that never really existed, and a woman that's known the world over. My first story is about Marie Schotte-Lehouzky, an Austrian architect, actually the first female architect in Austria, who made her first contribution to the kitchen in 1926 in Frankfurt, Germany. Frankfurt was suffering from a housing problem, a housing shortage, and like many cities, manufacturing plants that had been previously used for war efforts were now being transitioned to nation building. Lehouzky was commissioned to design a kitchen in a box, a manufactured unit that could be repeated over and over again and quickly to take care of the 10,000 housing units that had been developed or proposed for the city. Now, Lehouzky, who admitted she knew nothing about cooking, took on this project with an eye towards functionality and ergonomics. She used time motion studies, similar to what was being done in manufacturing plants at the time, to understand the work involved in preparing a meal. So she studied women and watched them as they cooked, and so for the first time, the work done by women in the kitchen was taken seriously, elevated to a science, the science of home economics. Her kitchen was called the Frankfurt Kitchen, and it had a built-in place for everything. It had a desk and a window for ventilation and an ironing board, and for the first time, built-in cabinets and adequate sanitary work surfaces. It was also a separate unit that separated from the rest of the living area, which was pretty uncommon for European apartments at the time. But it gave women their own particular workspace, their own zone, and took the work that women were doing in the kitchen very seriously. My next story is about Betty Crocker. Like the goddess Venus, Betty was birthed a full-grown woman who knew everything there was about cooking. She brought women back into the kitchen after the war and single-handedly was responsible for putting baked goods at the core of everyone's diet. She changed our psyche about the work of cooking, and depending on your perspective, messed us all up about what it meant to be a woman, telling us that a woman's ability to cook was the key to her family's affection. The Betty Crocker test kitchens took cooking very seriously. The women who worked there were dressed in white, like nurses or scientists, emphasizing both the sanitary state of the kitchens and the chemistry of cooking. Betty Crocker made cooking easier for women. Open a box, add milk and eggs, mix and bake. Cooking didn't need to be hard because Betty was doing all the heavy lifting. Betty was so popular that in 1945, Fortune magazine named her the second most popular woman in America, the first being Eleanor Roosevelt. In the 1950s, we had gotten past the Depression and prosperity was on the horizon. Technology had given us a lot of conveniences that allowed for more leisure time, and the kitchen was becoming a more visible part of the home decor. And our love affair with food and TV began. By the 60s, we had ditched the post-war metal cabinets, and honey-colored knotty pine became all the rage. And if you had a dishwasher, you were the envy of your neighborhood. By the 70s, the microwave made its debut, and Frank Lloyd Wright's kitchen island finally became the latest kitchen idea for mainstream America. The island brought us back into the kitchen to sit and to eat, but to mainly watch what we did best. And now with TV in every home in America, we were getting invited into the kitchens of some of the finest chefs in the world. Which brings me to my final story. Julia Childs is probably our first real celebrity chef. Her show, The French Chef, was popular and ran for 10 years in production and 16 years in post-production, reruns. It was a 30-minute live-action taped production with no second camera and no post-production editing. It was live theater with all of its inevitable flubs and gaffes and mistakes. If she dropped a lamb on the floor, she would tell you, if you drop a lamb on the floor, just pick it up. If you're alone in the kitchen, who's going to know? And with no live audience, it was just Julia talking to you on the other side of her island. She invited you in to sit and to watch and to drink a little wine, maybe drink a lot of wine, and watch her as she worked her way through her French cooking. She made French cooking easy for women, for anybody who watched her. The cooking shows remain extremely popular today with chefs that are cooking all manners of cuisine, and they appeal to everyone regardless of their age. When my granddaughter Alana was small, she came to visit me and sat on the other side of my kitchen island as I prepared our meal. And I got all out the ingredients, and as I was getting ready to dice, she said, "No, Grandma, you're not doing it right. You need to talk." It's easy not to like cooking, to not like the mess and the cleanup and the effort, even if the meal is tasty. But to be in a kitchen that allows you to watch someone cook, to watch them dance their way through making even a simple meal, or maybe hear them whistle or sing. That's the kind of kitchen I want to be in. Thanks, Dad. Thank you.